do want to take a few minutes today and just kind of nonchalantly, not following a script. You're probably going to have some gameplay thrown up in the background. Talk a little bit about Destiny, and I do want to do a series of videos that focus on smaller portions of the game. I don't think there's much of a conversational point in talking about the big things happening with the game, the big things happening with Bungie. I think that a more reasonable and appropriate approach to, making Destiny the best game it can be for everybody is to focus on some of the smaller aspects or some of the specific aspects of the game that could use some work, offer some suggestions, offer some insights from, other games that I've been playing personally and, other experiences that I've had in other games, and, try to just build a series of smaller videos with specific pain points in the game and ways to hopefully improve them. And, instead of having 10 videos where we talk about the game as a whole sucks, Bungie sucks, which I don't think either of those two things are true, I think that it's going to be a much more efficient dialogue by having a video talk about a specific part of the game, ways that it's maybe falling short of our expectations, ways to improve that experience in future seasons and future expansions. And then hopefully somebody at Bungie listens to some of these things and this feedback is pushed up. So that's going to be what we're talking about today. And if you can tell by the title, we're going to be talking about the Vanguard Strike playlist. Now, the Vanguard Strike playlist has been something that has been in Destiny since Destiny 1, way back in 2014, 2015. And the Vanguard Strike playlist is one of the key pillars of the game. And this is Bungie's own words, not mine. And because it's one of the key pillars of the game, in previous years, Bungie has expanded. They've added additional difficulty options. They've tried to enhance the replayability factor of this playlist so that it's one of those things that if you log into the game and you don't know really what you want to do, it's something you can matchmake into. You can hopefully have a good time, hopefully get a few things from it that, won't make you feel like you waste your time, and just have a good experience with it. If you've got 30 minutes to kill, you can spend it in there, or if you've got a few hours to kill, you can also spend a chunk of that time in there as well. So, looking at the current state of the Strike playlist in Destiny 2 today, you have a basic level difficulty Vanguard Strike playlist that will randomly matchmake you with two other players. You will be placed into what is called a strike, which is very similar to other MMOs as a dungeon. You've got a pretty linear built out level. At the ending of that level, you'll have a boss fight. Some strikes may have multiple boss fights, and then at the ending, you'll get some type of reward, and that's pretty much it. If you're doing the basic level of difficulty, it will automatically put you back into a matchmaking queue, throw you into the next one, and you can just rinse and repeat until your heart's desire. Now, Bungie also has a strike sort of streak system put into place where the more strikes you do in a row, I think up to 5, you'll get increased, I believe, XP. You might also get some increased current season rewards. But in my opinion, it's not something that is crazy noticeable or something that you could really work towards and feel an improvement as far as the value of time that you're putting in and getting out. Now, as far as this core playlist and the difficulty, how has Bungie leaned on this core pillar for the community being replayable? What Bungie's done is they've turned every single one of these strikes and they have what's called a Nightfall difficulty. And the Nightfall version of these strikes are typically a lot tougher. They are going to offer tougher enemies, tougher challenges, maybe even some additional mechanics in some of them. And you're also going to, in most cases, have better rewards at the end, whether that's in the form of a Nightfall specific weapon that you can only get from that harder difficulty, or you're going to have increases in currency, you're going to get faster reputation or renown, as it's called in other games with the Vanguard Strike people. So the Nightfall versions of those strikes do have some rewards that, again, are offered up, and you are incentivized to run that, a few times a week if you so choose to. Nothing super crazy, though. And then finally, we have what's called the Grandmaster Nightfall Strike. Now, Grandmaster Nightfall Strikes, I believe, were introduced in Shadowkeep. I could be incorrect on that, but it's been in the game for a few years. And the Nightfall Strike system essentially chooses one strike out of the kind of weak, one strike out of the pool, I should say, and it cranks the difficulty up to probably as high as Bungie is comfortable pushing it up without making it feel like it's unbeatable, and throw the players into it with the odds extremely stacked against them, if you ask me. And if you emerge victorious from that strike, then you will be getting some pretty decent rewards. I'm not going to lie. The Nightfall Strike rewards on Grandmaster difficulty are pretty good. I would say they're probably one of the best sources of loot in the game. Here's the issue, though. Bungie said from the get-go that the Grandmaster Nightfall Strike was not something they were building to be a repeatable in-game loop. It was not something you were meant to farm. Now, the Bungie community and the higher-ups, as far as the endgame speedrunners and speed farmers, well, they didn't care. They found ways to speedrun these pieces of content, and more than likely today, if you go in and try to find somebody to run a Grandmaster Nightfall with, it's going to be somebody who's ran the strike before, they're comfortable with it, and I would honestly say that for a big majority of strikes in the game, you have a good, reasonable chance of beating it. That is, again, just my opinion. I might be biased in this because I have a lot of playtime in the game, but I would say that if you're a decent player, you have a reasonable chance of beating it. Now, with that being said, I don't know the statistics as far as people who participate in the Grandmaster Nightfall Strike and people who do not and play the game daily. I would imagine that a big part of the community is probably not engaging with it because the floor to enter is at such a high level. Most people will go into these things and get one-shotted. They won't know the most efficient loadouts. They won't know how to deal with champions effectively. And it's kind of a shit show, in my opinion. It was built for super hardcore endgamers. They have dealt with the system for years. There's not been any really big changes to it. And that is kind of the endgame approach to the strike system. So with that in mind, that's how the strike playlist exists in the game today. You either have basic level difficulty, which is a walk in the park. You can do it blindfolded. You have the basic Nightfall level difficulty, which, you know, you can go through still pretty reasonably quickly. The rewards are okay. They're nothing too crazy about. They're definitely not a repeatable, engaging experience. I would say 1 or 2 times and you've gotten the gist of it. And then you've got the Nightfall Grandmasters, which are not built to be ran multiple times. I would say a large portion of the community is probably not engaging with them, but the rewards are good. I will say that about them. So I still don't think that the strike playlist is at a reasonable place that offers the Destiny community what they want. So here's a suggestion, and just keep in mind the suggestions I make on these videos are probably going to be heavily tied to other games I'm playing, other ways that systems that exist in Destiny have been done in other games, and, you know, more efficient ways, more fun ways, more engaging ways to do them. When it comes to strikes, it's my opinion that strikes offer some of the best content, and they are built to be replayable to a certain extent. It's just that the loot system, the incentivization system, I think is lacking, and for me personally, I want there to be a challenge when it comes with decent rewards. To be honest with you, the Grandmaster system, in my opinion, again, the Grandmaster system is something that can still kind of be walked through if you have any kind of brain, and you can get some crazy good stuff from it. I personally would like the Grandmaster Nightfalls to be harder in some respect, or to have an option for me to make them harder. This is where the solution I'm about to kind of lay out comes into play. Essentially, with the strike system in Destiny, what I would like to see is some kind of adaptation of a system that exists in World of Warcraft for their dungeons and strike system, which is called Mythic Plus. Now, in World of Warcraft, you have a very similar structure to what I just laid out. Remember, in Destiny, we have the normal versions of strikes, which is just an entry level. You can run them all day, nothing too crazy. You have a Nightfall level, which is kind of a step up, but again, there's nothing super crazy. You'll get some slightly better rewards, still nothing super special. And then you have Grandmaster, which is meant to be super endgame, run it once a week, not meant to be replayable, probably a low percentage of players engaging with it. These are the 3 tiers of strikes in Destiny. In World of Warcraft, you have the normal versions of their dungeon system, which are very comparable to strikes. You have the heroic dungeons, which again are comparable to Destiny's Nightfall strikes, where the difficulty's bumped up and the rewards are bumped up as well, but still, in my opinion, nothing too crazy to gawk over. But here's where the dogma diverts in World of Warcraft. In World of Warcraft, the next tier up is called Mythic Plus. Now, if you have played World of Warcraft or you've heard of this system before, you're probably going to know where I'm going with this. But let's say you haven't. Essentially what the Mythic Plus system in World of Warcraft does is it gives the players a escalating level of challenge that they can introduce to themselves in a given week, or the dungeon system, or in Destiny case it would be the strike system. The way that Mythic Plus works in WoW is that every week you will run a basic Mythic level dungeon. It's a step up from Heroic, but it's not super crazy that nobody can approach it. You will definitely have more people that could approach a Mythic level 1 strike, or excuse me, a Mythic level 1 dungeon in WoW than you would have that could enter a Grandmaster Nightfall strike in Destiny. You would have a much higher amount of people that can do that. Now, once you beat a basic Mythic dungeon in World of Warcraft, you are rewarded with some loot, if you're lucky, and you're also rewarded with a Mythic Keystone. And this Mythic Keystone is actually going to be a key to a new dungeon, or if we were, let's say, playing Destiny, this would be a new key to a new strike. That is a bump up in level difficulty from the strike that you just ran, or the dungeon that you just ran in World of Warcraft. In World of Warcraft, this system, to my knowledge, I believe is endless. I think once you start getting up into the plus 20s and 30s, you're going to be reaching that pinnacle. And in Destiny, you could introduce a very similar system where instead of Grandmaster Nightfalls, let's gut this. Let's call them just Nightfall Plus or something in similar terms. When you beat a basic Nightfall Plus strike in Destiny, you'll get some rewards that are again a step up from the basic Nightfalls, and then you'll get a key or some kind of entrance token to a Nightfall plus 2. And you could keep going with this system. Every time you go up in difficulty, and you give an escalating level of challenge to the endgame players while also giving an escalating level or quality of the loot as well. And you also have a low barrier to entry because the basic Nightfall Plus dungeon is not anywhere near a Grandmaster level dungeon. You could, for instance, set the Grandmaster level dungeon at around Nightfall plus 10, and then if you go past Nightfall plus 10, you're going to be approaching some very difficult gameplay territory. That's just an example. Bungie could do whatever they want with this system. Now, this system in World of Warcraft accomplishes a few things that I think would also be accomplished in Destiny. You offer a endgame pursuit for players who don't want to be match made and play in raids, which I would say there's probably a good portion of the Bungie community that doesn't want to participate in raids, but if they can do endgame pursuit in strikes, they would probably do that. The second thing it opens up is it opens up an endgame activity with a low barrier to entry. Again, I would say that the level of players playing Grandmaster Nightfalls is probably rather low than what you could introduce with this new system. Again, make this new level of difficulty at its basic level, Nightfall Plus, a few levels higher than a basic Nightfall strike. You've got a huge barrier to entry. And then as soon as you start seeing people complete these, go on to the level 1s, level 2s, level 3s, level 4, you'll see that players will naturally start to dwindle off as the content reaches a difficulty level that they are not able to beat. And this also introduces another thing that Destiny, in my opinion, does not have, is it incentivizes players to go out and build craft and do some more things with their build that maybe they're traditionally not really incentivized to do. I would say you can beat most of the content in Destiny with the same 1 or 2 loadouts with some minor variations. With this system, you could definitely have a need to have a loadout for every single version of a strike that's possible in this Nightfall playlist. That's something that could definitely happen. Another thing that I think is also needs to be talked about is the way that the loot system works in a game like World of Warcraft, and how I think Destiny would have to adapt, because that's another problem with the strike playlist in Destiny, is the loot incentive and the loot types just don't always align with what the endgame player wants. Let's take World of Warcraft, for example. In World of Warcraft, everything as far as items are attached to their item level. So an item level that is higher typically means that the stats that can roll on that piece of armor or piece of gear are also going to be able to row higher as well. So in essence, the higher your item level in your gear, the better that gear is. As you go up in those mythic keys we talked about, every 2 or 3 you go up, the possible item level that can drop from the ending of that dungeon in World of Warcraft will also go up as well. You could introduce a very similar system in Destiny, where every time you climb into a new Nightfall Plus keystone, or every 1 to 2 levels, the type of gear that you get could also increase in value. Now, how Bungie is going to do this is honestly, at this point, something that is up in the air. They have definitely been sort of invested on not raising the power level every season, so instead of giving us drops that drop at higher power levels, there would almost need to be a new incentivization system for loot. And an idea that I've had before, this is a small idea, and by the way, the incentivization and loot system in Destiny is probably going to be a whole other video that we can talk about. But in this example, in this strike playlist example, let's say for instance that every season there is a Nightfall Plus set of armor, there is a Nightfall Plus set of weapons, and these could be modified versions of weapons in the Nightfall playlist. You know, Bungie doesn't have to go completely all out with this, but there just has to be something that can set the players apart who choose to engage in this system. Now, they can't just make a set of armor, they can't just make a set of weapons, because those already exist. Where I think we need to add some distinction is every time that you climb to new levels in this Nightfall Plus playlist, you are getting chances when you complete those strikes to get A, better versions of the armor and the weapons from this Nightfall Plus set. You are also possibly offered transmog options that are exclusive for this Nightfall Plus set of armor, set of weapons. You could possibly even have an upgrade system that is attached to only these Nightfall Plus weapons and gear pieces that makes these weapons and gear pieces a set above everything else in the game. And here's the thing. I understand that Bungie is kind of afraid of putting the best type of stuff, the best kind of PvE alien killers in parts of their game. And I believe a part of that, way back when they discussed this, was that putting the best things behind some of the hardest content, you know, it locks out a big part of the player base from getting to it. Well, that's where the low barrier to entry comes in. If you put some of this really good gear behind this Nightfall Plus playlist, people running basic level Nightfall Plus 2s, 3s, 4s, they can still have access to some of this gear. But let's say that you add additional unlocks, additional stats, maybe additional upgrading options, additional stat rerolling capabilities for the gear for people who go higher than Nightfall Plus 10s, Nightfall Plus 15s, or even Nightfall's 20s. You know, add additional cosmetics, transmogs, maybe add a prestige version of this armor for people who reach Nightfall Plus 20, 25 in a season, or, you know, go all out. Add an exclusive weapon for people who reach Nightfall 25. There's so much incentivization that can be tied into a system of escalating difficulty that I think Bungie should experiment with if a system like this were to be added. And this is something that, again, is specific to the Vanguard playlist. You've still got the normal mode for casuals who just want to sit back, not have to worry about much, just blast away, which is perfectly fine. You've got the entry-level Nightfall, basic level Nightfall, which drops some decent gear, better than normal, but not, you know, nothing killer. And then you've got Nightfall Plus, which is a playlist within the Vanguard playlist with escalating levels of difficulty for players who choose to pursue that, with escalating quality of loot drops, and for players who really engage with this playlist and climb, you've also got additional options for upgrading, additional options for cosmetics, and maybe even additional options for power that only exist in this part of the game. The incentivization for climbing these high ranks is really what Bungie has to nail. I think with previous things they've done in the past, such as ornaments, such as specific weapons in certain playlists, I think this is a pursuit that they need to invest in, because that's what drives engagement. Engagement in Destiny is not driven by adding a set of armor that nobody's going to wear. Engagement in Destiny is driven by adding a set of armor that does something that nothing else in the game can do, that it's crazy, that it's awesome. Put a set in the Vanguard Nightfall Plus playlist. Put a set in there where every time you run a Nightfall that's +5 or higher, you have a chance of getting one of these 5 pieces of armor that if you wear all 5 of them, you get some crazy stat bonuses, some crazy perks active. Add a prestige version of this set that only drops for people who make it higher than +15. that has better stats. Maybe these sets have extra abilities that are only active in the Nightfall Plus playlist. I could rattle on all night. There's all kinds of ideas up here. The implementation of a system like this is something that could really invigorate the Core Strike playlist. It also adds that escalating challenge. They could tie leaderboards, they could tie triumphs, they could attach titles into this system. It's something that, given some thought, could add some much needed spice to one of the parts of the game that's been with us since the beginning, and then also lays a foundation for some really awesome stuff for them in the future. That's my thought. A Nightfall Plus playlist, similar to World of Warcraft. Let me know what you think below. Is it a good idea, bad idea? Do you see flaws with it? Let me know what you think. See you in the next one.